Yeah, I am sharing on tribal development administration and the issues and Indian experience. Basically, tribal development is one of the most important challenges in India because the tribals everywhere they are potential workforce, but they are not able to bargain the sufficient wages because they could not transform into market forces in India and as well as worldwide because of they are not able to bargain the value of the wages from the workforce. And then scheduled tribes mostly constitute approximately 8.6% of the population in India, and around 104 million tribes are living at present, and they constitute significant percentage. And here to the world, they are 28.11%. There were over 730 scheduled tribes notified under Article 342 in the Constitution of India. And different approaches followed during the post-independence in India. And Indian administrators believed and they studied and they have gone through three approaches: isolation, assimilation, and integration. But in the beginning, 1950s, our Indian administrators believed in assimilation. Assimilation means here they should not be integrated with the general category immediately because they are very sensitive and culturally they are different from the majority Hindus. That's why here slow and steady integration can be possible, and with the protective measures in the constitution. And we all know that they are having a close relation with the forest resources. And if you see the forest availability, wherever the forests occupy or wherever the forest land is available, the forest became their habitats. We know very well, everybody known that. This presentation particularly covers the major developmental issues, that is how we have a design in India, the strategy or a developmental administrative design for the development of tribes, particularly in the constitution. Before constitution, in the colonial period itself, started a special provisions for the development administration for the tribes, particularly in 1874, the British Indian government started Scheduled District Act, and which is made a separate administrative strategy for the tribal development in Indian continent. Because of this came into existence out of so many struggles from the tribes under the colonial period. And later, the Government of India Acts 1919 and 1935, and these constitutions provided some provisions for the development of scheduled tribes in India and broadly divided the tribal areas into excluded and partially excluded areas under the control of the Governor General. And during the post-independence, the Presidential Order 1950 divides the scheduled areas into two categories, that is 5th schedule and 6th schedule. The main difference between the 5th schedule and 6th schedule is the completely fully excluded areas comes under the 6th schedule and partially excluded areas comes under the 5th schedule. And in the 6th schedule areas, they have autonomous tribal councils to make plannings for their own development, and their autonomous means they have a full freedom. And the general acts and the general policies, they won't administer the tribal areas, but the governor administrates the tribal development. Directly, the government is responsible for that because the constitution provided some kind of freedom to freedom to make their own decisions for their own development administration. But in the case of sixth schedule, and like some of the states we can see, I will mention later the states, and here the fifth schedule states, they are having tribal advisory councils. Tribal advisory councils are not autonomous. That is the main difference. So in the fifth schedule, the tribals don't have autonomous tribal councils, but they are tribal advisory councils, which are having less powers. That is the major difference. And in the constitution, the tribes identified as educationally, socially backward and depressed classes, backward classes. Finally, they classified into scheduled tribes. And all the tribes scheduled into one list. And particularly in the Constituent Assembly, it was mentioned that the scheduled tribes term used for the development administration purpose, and particularly it's a political measure. So many provisions provided by the Constitution for the tribal development, that is some of the articles mentioning educational, cultural safeguards, some of the articles mentioning social safeguards, some of the articles providing economic safeguards, political safeguards, and service safeguards. Tribal areas, particularly these autonomous tribal councils, northeastern states, particularly Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and the Mizoram states were declared. They comes under the sixth schedule, and there the people can enjoy autonomous powers, and with the help of autonomous tribal councils, they can make their own decisions, and the general laws, acts directly, it cannot implement in their areas. And whereas in AP, Telangana, Rajasthan, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, Karnataka, these states are partially excluded areas. In these areas, the tribal are having tribal advisory councils. They are having a limited powers, but most of the general acts and general policies, they directly involve in the tribal areas. That is the major difference between these two. And because of this difference, the northeastern states, particularly the states which are fully excluded, they are having autonomous powers, and they can restrict the act which is affecting the negatively, and they can promote their own decisions or their own policies they can make and recommend, and or they get the permission from the governor to implement their own policies. That's why here, so the negative impact over from the policies, they are getting very less, and compared to partially excluded areas or fifth schedule. And this paper, I would like to share some of the effects of general policies on tribes, particularly land diversification. Huge amount of land diversification has taken place in the tribal areas, and tribal displacement also has taken place because of construction of the huge projects and dams in the tribal areas and forest areas. Because here the general category people, or everybody is getting benefit from the dams, but negatively affecting by the tribes, because these projects constructed in tribal areas by the idea of integrated development approach. Actually, the integrated development approach designed for the overall development of the tribal people in tribal areas, but the policy interpretation is the bureaucrats are considering that the tribal areas are including with the general areas. That's why here the huge area is going under the exploitation for general benefit. And here big dams, and because of the big dams construction, displacement has taken place, particularly Bihar and some of the states like AP and Himachal Pradesh. These states are responsible for the huge amount of displacement of the population, tribal population. But the rehabilitation policies have utterly failed in providing alternatives. And here, and the second point, I would like to focus on land alienation, which has taken place and very significantly it affected negatively the tribal people in the tribal areas. Particularly, so many cases, around 10 lakhs, 10,000 and 38 acres alienated under different methods, but only 37% of the alienated land could be possible to restore because of the there is no commitment, proper commitment for the restoration of the alienated land. And some of the case studies I have gone through, and with these case studies, I would like to present the methods followed by the non-tribals to gain the tribal land. Particularly, in the fifth schedule, the tribal areas can be divided into three categories, that is plain area, scheduled area, and protected area. The majority tribes are living in the scheduled area, and significant number of tribes are living in the protected area, which is under the control of the Forest Department, and the remaining tribes, less percentage of tribes living in the plain area along with the non-tribes. Here, different methods followed by the non-tribes to occupy the tribal land, and that is in the scheduled area, particularly the government of India suggested to the state governments to enact some of the land transfers regulation acts, and as a part of that, AP government, Andhra Pradesh government made 1956 LTR Act, and it could be able to control the land transfers, but it's not fully controlled. And later, 1970 Act made by the same government, somehow it succeeded in regulating the land transfers in the scheduled area. And so many different methods they have followed. Particularly, if you take a pre-independence period and the post-independence period, during the pre-independence period and manipulation of the records, money lending were responsible for the huge amount of land transfers or land alienation. During the post-independence period, somehow the land alienation has declined, and because of the Land Transfer Regulation Acts. So it is showing that Land Transfer Regulation Acts impact we can see here, they could be regulated the transfers. And different approaches followed by the non-tribes to restore tribal people to restore the alienated land in different areas. I'm not going to deal with this.
Dr. Rao, you just have 3 minutes, please wind up.
And particularly 3 villages I have gone through. Darbagudam from
you'll have one. You have 1 minute left.
Yeah. Sorry.
Just have 2 minutes, please wind up.
To understand the land alienation in the protected area, particularly I have gone through the Rajiv Gandhi Wildlife Sanctuary or Tiger Reserve, and here my point is that here in the protected area, even though the Forest Rights Act and PISA Act, that is Panchayati Raj extension to the Scheduled Area Act, providing so many provisions for the livelihoods, but the rules of the Wildlife Protection Act is restricting. Here we are seeing here in this table, all the basic facilities are restricted by the rules of the Wildlife Protection Act. That's why here it's government mechanism failed in regulating. The main reasons I'm going to explain because of lack of time, just unfair using of the or execution of the social exclusion and inclusion concepts. Here, in Indian society, SCs, scheduled castes are a part and parcel of the Hindu society, were excluded unfairly, but tribal people, they have their own unique cultural identity, but they are including with the dominant Hindu groups. That is the main reason for the huge exploitation. So that is unfair inclusion has been taking place in India and by the integrating policies, because tribals are increasing, tribal areas are increasing because of land, tribal land. That's why here they are affecting negatively. And the difference in de facto status here in plain area, Hindus, among the Hindus, the government can identify the de facto status of land because they cultivate. But among the tribes, there was a migrating nature. That's why it is difficult to identify the de facto status. That's why courts, the legal procedure can consider only de facto status to give the de jure status. That's why here we need to recognize the problem of migrating nature. And an important point, lack of identification of traditional customary boundaries. That is one important point. Forest Department is failing to identify the tribal rights because the Forest Department, particularly in the protected area, the government is not able to recognize or identifying the traditional customary boundaries. And so rules of the Wildlife Protection Act is affecting negatively because of top-down approach, because of colonial influence on the execution, and so they are not considering the tribal participation, active participation in decision making in the relocation.
Dr. Rao, your time is over.
And third
Dr.
point,
Rao, I'm sorry. We're moving on to the next speaker. My apologies.
Yeah. His last point.
Please wind up.
Alternative things is we have to reorganize the villages, and two options we are having here. And this is reorganization model we are expecting, and in the scheduled areas, in the protected areas, this is reorganization option 1, reorganization option 2. And here the schedule in the protected area, the tribal villages are attaching with the non-tribal villages, unfortunately, but it is not reasonable. It's not that kind of inclusion is unfair inclusion. That's why here tribal villages separately should be identified as a gram panchayats, and the government should give gram panchayat status to the tribal villages by reorganizing. And some of the solutions also we made. Because of lack of time, I'm not able to read. Sorry for inconvenience. And then some of the solutions given for the before reorganizing the tribal villages for their development administration. Thanks for giving this opportunity. Sorry for inconvenience.
Thank you.